My wife demanded apologize in front of our parents for your incompetence or I'll ruin your career. I agreed. At dinner, she read my apology aloud, only to find the title Sworn Confession of her own scheme. Liam, 42. Male believed the publishing house my father built was a legacy of words and integrity. I never imagined my own wife would try to burn it all down just to rule over the ashes. There is a particular quiet that settles into a room filled with old books, a scent of paper and history that I have always associated with peace. My father's office, now mine, was the heart of Sutton Press. The dark mahogany shelves, the worn leather chairs, the faint, sweet smell of binding glue. It was more than a place of business, it was a sanctuary. On that particular morning, a Tuesday, I believe I was holding a manuscript from a new poet. The pages filled with a raw, startling talent that made the hairs on my arm stand up. This was why my father started this press over 40 years ago. This feeling of discovery of holding a voice in your hands that needed to be heard. This was the legacy. The peace was broken by the soft click of the door. Elena stood there, not as my wife of 15 years, but as the head of marketing and business development. She was immaculate in a charcoal grey suit, her tablet glowing in her hand. The scent of her expensive perfume, sharp and floral, cut through the gentle aroma of the room. She didn't look at the manuscript in my hands. Her eyes were on me, assessing. "Liam, you have a moment," she asked, though it was less a question and more a statement that she was taking one. "Marcus is expecting the updated projections for the fall quarter. I told him we'd have them by noon." Marcus Thorne, the new investor. He was Elena's prize acquisition, a man with deep pockets and a reputation for aggressive modern business tactics. He was everything Sutton Press was not. "I'll get to them, Elena," I said carefully, placing the manuscript on my desk. I was just finishing the final review of the Hemlock collection. She sighed a small, impatient sound. "The poetry collection. Liam, we've discussed this. The return on investment for poetry is negligible. It's a vanity project. Marcus is interested in scalable content, digital rights, multi-platform branding." I looked at her, at this woman I loved who spoke a language that felt increasingly foreign to me. "It's not a vanity project, Elena. It's literature. It's the foundation of what we are. A foundation doesn't pay the bills in the 21st century." She replied, her tone softening just enough to seem like she was guiding me, not lecturing. "I just want us to be successful, to be powerful." She came over, kissed my cheek, her lips cool against my skin. "Have the projections ready, please." And with that, she was gone, leaving a trail of her perfume and a subtle chill in the air. I looked at the manuscript on my desk, and for the first time, it felt less like a treasure and more like a relic. That feeling of unease followed me into the boardroom later that week. It was our biannual strategic meeting. My father's portrait hung on the far wall, his kind, intelligent eyes seeming to watch over the proceedings. I had just finished presenting my proposal for a series of beautifully bound reissues of the classics that had first put Sutton Press on the map. It was a project dear to my heart, a way of honouring our history while introducing these timeless stories to a new generation. When I finished, there was a polite but muted applause. Then Eleanor spoke. "Thank you, Liam, for that heartfelt presentation." She began, a practiced smile on her face. "And while I appreciate the sentiment behind honouring our legacy assets, I have to ask if we're looking to the past or to the future." She turned to the rest of the board, her voice resonating with confidence. "What I'm proposing in conjunction with Marcus's strategic input is a pivot. We need to be lean aggressive. We need to be acquiring authors with strong social media platforms, creating synergistic content for streaming services. We need to think about intellectual property, not just books." She didn't just disagree with me. She reframed my passion as a quaint, unprofitable hobby. She made me sound old, out of touch. I saw a few of the newer board members, the ones she and Marcus had courted, nodding in agreement. I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. I wanted to argue to defend my father's vision, but I saw the look in Elena's eyes. It was a warning, a plea to not make a scene. So I stayed silent, clenching my fists under the polished surface of the table. I chose to keep the peace, telling myself that a healthy debate was good for the company. I chose to believe she was only trying to help. The company's anniversary party was a grand affair. Elena had organized it, of course, and it was flawless. Waiters with champagne flutes weaved through a crowd of authors, agents, and investors. I was playing the part of the gracious host, but I felt like a stranger in my own home. At one point, I found myself talking to Eleanor's father, a retired businessman with a sharp mind and a quiet demeanor. He was one of the few people whose presence still felt genuine. He stood beside me watching his daughter as she held court laughing with Marcus Thorne. "She's got fire, that one," he said, his voice low. "Always has. Built for success." He took a sip of his drink, then turned to me, his eyes serious. "You're a good man, Liam. You're steady. You value the right things." He paused, and his next words were heavy with unspoken meaning. "I'm proud of what she's accomplished here. But I just hope she remembers that a foundation takes a long time to build, but it can be torn down very, very quickly." He patted my shoulder and walked away, leaving me to ponder his words. It was a warning, I see that now. A red flag delivered with fatherly concern. But that night I dismissed it. I told myself he was just an old-fashioned man worried about the pace of change. I watched my wife across the room, beautiful and brilliant and so very ambitious, and I chose to believe in the foundation we had built together. I chose to believe it was strong enough to withstand anything. The weeks following the anniversary party were heavy with an unspoken tension. The air at Sutton Press, once collegial and inspiring, had become thick with whispers and sideways glances. Projects were delayed, meetings became fraught with a new political edge, and Elena moved through the halls with a sharp, predatory energy, while Marcus Thorne's presence on the board felt less like an investment and more like an occupation. I found myself retreating to the quiet sanctuary of my office, feeling the legacy my father had built slipping through my fingers like fine sand. I was managing a company, but it felt as though I was losing a war I didn't even know I was fighting. The breaking point. The engineered crisis I should have seen coming arrived in the form of an email. It was from the agent of our most celebrated novelist, a man whose career I had personally championed for over a decade. The email was cold and formal, stating that his client was invoking an exit clause in his contract due to a breach of professional confidence. A competitor, they claimed, had approached them with a counteroffer that contained sensitive details about our marketing strategy for his upcoming book details that could only have come from an internal leak. It was a devastating blow, not just financially, but personally. It was an attack on my integrity. That evening, I came home exhausted and disheartened, wanting nothing more than the quiet comfort of my own home. I found Elena in the living room, sitting perfectly poised in an armchair, a glass of wine on the table beside her. She was not reading, she was waiting. The television was off. The silence in the room was absolute. "We need to talk, Liam," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I loosened my tie, sinking onto the sofa opposite her. "It's been a difficult day, Elena. The news about Arthur Vance." "Difficult," she cut in, her voice sharp. "It's a catastrophe, and it happened on your watch." I stared at her, taken aback by the immediate accusation. "I'm still trying to understand what happened, how those details could have possibly gotten out." "Oh, I think it's quite clear how they got out," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's what happens when leadership is weak, unfocused, when sentimentality is prioritized over security. You were so busy rereading old poetry manuscripts, you let our most profitable author walk out the door." The injustice of her words was breathtaking. Before I could form a defense, she stood up, retrieved a thick manila folder from the sideboard, and threw it onto the coffee table between us. The slap of paper on wood echoed in the silent room. "I've been preparing for this," she said, her voice now a cold, controlled fury. "For the day your incompetence would finally cause a real crisis." I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of my emails, highlighted and annotated. Sales projections for my legacy projects were presented next to charts showing their supposed drain on resources. There were even notes from meetings, my words twisted to sound indecisive and weak. It was a meticulously crafted narrative of my failure, a dossier compiled by my own wife. "What is this, Elena?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. This is a character assassination. This, she said, leaning forward, her eyes blazing, is reality. This is the proof I need to show the board, to show my family and yours, that you are no longer fit to lead this company. You are drowning in the past, Liam, and you are pulling all of us down with you. She began to pace, her performance escalating. She spoke of her ambition, her vision, how she had worked tirelessly to modernize Sutton Press while I had held it back. She painted herself as the savior, the one fighting to save our future from my nostalgia. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of rage, of frustration. It was a masterful act, and I was the sole, horrified audience. I tried to reason with her to defend my record, but every word I spoke was twisted and used against me. Finally, drained and defeated, I fell silent. That was what she was waiting for. She stopped pacing and stood before me, her expression hardening into something cruel and absolute. "This cannot go on," she said. "Your weakness has become a liability that is harming my reputation, our company, and our marriage, and I will not allow it." She took a deep breath and delivered her ultimatum. The words were precise, honed to inflict the maximum possible damage. "You will stand before our parents at Sunday dinner, and you will apologize to me. You will apologize for your lack of judgment, for your mismanagement, and for the professional damage your incompetence has caused me. You will admit that I have been right all along." She paused, letting the humiliation of her demand sink in. "Or, this marriage is over, and I will take this folder to the board and ensure that your career at Sutton Press is over as well. Choose Liam." I looked up at her, at the woman who had shared my life for 15 years. I saw no trace of the person I had married. In her place was a stranger, a ruthless strategist who saw me not as a husband, but as an obstacle. The pain was immense, a physical blow to the chest. But beneath the pain, something else stirred. A profound, chilling clarity. The fog of love and denial that had clouded my judgment for years finally lifted. I saw everything and everyone for exactly what they were. A long moment passed. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Elena watched me, her expression triumphant, confident that she had broken me. Finally, I nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. My voice when I spoke was quiet and steady. "All right," I said, "I'll do it." The following morning, a fragile dawn broke over the city. I woke before the alarm, a strange sense of purpose having replaced the shock of the previous night. The pain was still there, a dull, heavy stone in my chest, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Downstairs, Elena was already dressed, sipping her coffee with an air of serene victory. "I've been thinking," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "Sunday dinner at your parents' house would be the most appropriate venue. It's important they hear it directly from you. Whatever you think is best, Elena." I replied, my voice even. I played the part of the defeated husband, agreeing to her terms, even asking for her input on the tone of my apology. Every word of compliance fed her arrogance, making her feel secure, unassailable. It was precisely what I needed. I went to the office that day, but not to oversee the press. I went directly to the accounting department, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. Citing a need for a personal budget review, I requested the complete payment records for the past 2 years to a list of external vendors. On that list was the strategic consulting firm her father had mentioned. By mid-afternoon, I was locked in my office, the door shut. The records spread across my desk. It didn't take a forensic accountant to see the pattern. Large, round-numbered payments, often exceeding $50,000, were made monthly to a shell corporation with a registered address that led to a simple post office box. The dates of the wire transfers corresponded perfectly with Eleanor's business trips and marketing conferences. My next call was to her father. I kept my voice steady, framing my questions as a simple matter of due diligence. "I was reviewing some of our marketing expenditures," I said, "and I was wondering if you'd ever had dealings with a firm called Apex Strategy Group in your own career." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Never heard of them," he said, his tone cautious. "Why do you ask?" I told him it was a firm Elena had engaged and the fees seemed substantial. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Liam. He finally said, his voice grave. A good businessman never signs a check without knowing exactly where the money is going. Be careful. He didn't need to say more. He had confirmed my suspicions, but financial irregularities were not enough. It could be explained away as poor judgment, not malice. I needed something more. I needed undeniable proof of intent. That evening, I sat in my office until long after the cleaning crews had gone home, the city lights twinkling below. I was surrounded by a fortress of paper, but I felt I was missing the keystone. I called the best corporate litigator in the city, a woman named Diana Albright, whose reputation was that of a surgeon, precise, unflappable, and devastatingly effective. I laid out the situation on the phone, the professional undermining the financial anomalies, the ultimatum. Her voice was calm, clinical. Suspicions are not evidence, Mr. Hayes. What we need is a direct link between the money and her personal intent. Is there any shared device, a cloud account, anything that might hold a record? Her question sparked a memory. The anniversary gift from the previous year, a state-of-the-art smartwatch. I had set it up for her, linking it to our family cloud account for backups, a feature she likely never thought twice about. Accessing the backup files felt like a profound violation, yet I knew it was a necessary one. I navigated through folders of health data and app settings until I found it a folder labeled Audio Recordings. My heart hammered in my chest. Most were short accidental triggers, a few seconds of indistinct chatter. And then I saw it. A file dated 6 weeks prior from a day she was supposedly on a business trip. The file was over 30 minutes long. With a trembling hand, I put on my headphones and pressed play. The first voice was Elena's, clear as a bell, laughing. The second was Marcus Thorne's. It was not a business meeting. They were in a hotel room. I could hear the clink of glasses. They spoke of the board members they had swayed of the company's assets. And then they spoke of me. He's just so trusting, Elena said, a cruel amusement in her voice. He still thinks this is about books about his father's precious legacy. He has no idea it's already mine. Marcus chuckled. And the final push, the fight you're planning. It will be a masterpiece, she replied. I'll make him look so unstable, so emotionally fragile, that asking him to step down will seem like an act of mercy. By the time he apologizes to me in front of his parents, the checkmate will be complete. I ripped the headphones from my ears, a silent scream trapped in my throat. The pain was absolute, a physical agony that hollowed me out completely. In that moment, the man who had loved Elena for 15 years died. He was replaced by something colder, harder. A man with nothing left to lose. The next day, I sat in Diana Albright's office, my face set like stone. I pushed a USB drive across her desk. Here is the direct link you asked for, I said. She listened to the recording, her expression unreadable. When it was over, she simply nodded. What is your desired outcome, Mr. Hayes? She asked. We can sue for a controlling stake, we can press for criminal charges, we can destroy her. I looked out the window at the bustling city below. Then I met her gaze, my voice steady and clear. I don't want to destroy her, I said. I want to bring the truth to light, and I want to let it do the rest of the work. The plan we formulated was simple in its audacity. We would draft a document beginning with the vague, rambling apology Elena expected. But the pages that followed would be a notarized, legally binding confession detailing the financial conspiracy and the affair, supported by excerpts from the recording and the accountant's report. It would be attached to the divorce papers. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for Sunday dinner. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had always been an institution, a weekly ritual of comfort and connection. The aroma of my mother's roast chicken, the familiar weight of the heavy silverware, the low hum of conversation. It was the bedrock of my childhood. But on that evening, the air in the warm wood-panelled dining room was brittle, with a tension so thick it felt as though a single wrong word would shatter it. My parents, bless their hearts, tried to maintain a facade of normalcy, asking about work, about the weather. My mother's smiles were strained. My father's questions were laced with a concern he could not quite hide. Elena's parents were also there. Her mother was quiet and anxious, sensing the discord. Her father, however, watched the proceedings with a kind of grim resignation, his gaze occasionally flickering towards me with something that looked like understanding. Elena, for her part, was a portrait of tragic grace. She was attentive to my mother, demure in her responses, and she played the role of the long-suffering wife with an Oscar-worthy conviction. I remained quiet, a ghost at the feast, moving my food around my plate. My composure seemed to unnerve Elena more than any outburst could have. She needed me to be broken, and my stillness was a variable she hadn't accounted for. After the plates were cleared and coffee was served, Elena placed her napkin on the table, a signal that the performance was about to begin. She cast a sad, knowing look around the table. "Before we have dessert," she began, her voice soft but carrying a deliberate weight, "Liam has something he needs to say. Something he needs to admit to all of us as a family." All eyes turned to me. I met each of their gazes, then slowly reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and withdrew a neatly folded sheaf of papers. I held it out towards Elena. She looked at the papers, then back at me, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She had expected me to read it, to stammer my way through a humiliating confession. "What's this?" she asked. "It's my apology," I said quietly, "the one you asked for." A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. This was better than she had imagined. My cowardice was so complete I couldn't even speak the words myself. She took the papers from my hand. "No," she said, her voice dripping with magnanimity. "Let me. I think it's important that everyone hears your remorse, but through the voice of the person you've wounded so deeply." She unfolded the papers, her posture straightening, preparing to deliver the killing blow. She cleared her throat and began to read. The first page was exactly what she expected, a meandering, vague admission of fault filled with phrases like "a failure of focus" and "losing sight of our shared goals." Her voice was rich with false emotion, conveying a deep and theatrical sense of injury. I watched my mother's face fill with sympathy for her. My own father looked down at the table, his disappointment in me palpable. Then Elena turned to the second page. Her confident cadence faltered for a fraction of a second. A small frown creased her brow as she scanned the first line. The heading was in bold, official-looking font, "Sworn and Notarized Confession." She stopped. The silence in the room stretched. "Go on, Elena," my father said, his voice quiet but firm. "What does it say?" Her eyes darted around the table, a cornered, panicked look replacing her smug composure. She was trapped. To stop now would be an admission that something was wrong. With a trembling hand, she lifted the page and continued, her voice now a strained, thin whisper. "I, Elena Hayes, do hereby confess to a deliberate and coordinated conspiracy." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard and forced herself to continue reading the words I had so carefully prepared for her. "A conspiracy with board member Marcus Thorne to unjustly remove my husband Liam Hayes from his position as CEO of Sutton Press through a campaign of professional sabotage and psychological manipulation." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Elena's own mother looked as if she might faint, but Elena's father simply closed his eyes, his grim expectations finally realized. Elena's face was ashen, her composure completely shattered. She was shaking her head, trying to speak to deny it, but her own voice was betraying her, reading the damning words. This conspiracy was conducted in tandem with a multi-year extramarital affair with the aforementioned Marcus Thorne. That was as far as she got. With a strangled cry, she threw the papers onto the table as if they were on fire. "It's a lie," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "He's a liar. He's twisting everything. This is a sick, twisted trap." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a murderous hatred. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached back into my jacket pocket. Slowly, deliberately, I took out the small silver digital recorder and placed it in the center of the polished mahogany table. Then, in the ringing silence of the room, I pressed the play button. The sound it made was small, a quiet, metallic click. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. It was the sound of a guillotine being released. And then, her own voice, laughing and confident, filled the horrified stillness, speaking the words that would end her world. The aftermath of the dinner party was not the explosion of rage and recrimination one might expect. It was instead a profound and heavy silence. The recording played for less than a minute before my father stood up and simply turned it off. The truth, stark and ugly, hung in the air, needing no further embellishment. Elena, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, was escorted out of the house by her own father, who did not say a word to her. He simply put a hand on her arm and led her away. His shoulders slumped with a sorrow that was deeper than anger. The war for my marriage was over. The war for my company, however, was scheduled to begin at 9 o'clock the next morning. I arrived at the Sutton Press headquarters an hour early. I walked through the quiet, familiar halls, the scent of paper and ink a comforting balm. I felt no triumph, no elation. I felt only a grim sense of duty, the way a surgeon must feel before a difficult but necessary operation. In the boardroom, I laid out my preparations on the polished table, with methodical precision, a copy of the forensic accountant's report for each board member, the notarized confession, a transcript of the recording, and the small silver USB drive that held the truth. The board members filed in their faces, grim. They had been summoned via a late-night email for an emergency meeting regarding a crisis of leadership. Elena and Marcus arrived together, a united front of defiance. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but filled with fire. His face was a mask of cold indignation. They took their seats opposite me, and the air crackled with hostility. The chairman of the board, a stoic and honourable man named Arthur Covington, who had served with my father for 30 years, called the meeting to order. "Liam," he said, his voice grave, "we are here. Please enlighten us." I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I did not speak of heartbreak or betrayal. I spoke of fiduciary duty, of corporate governance, and of a breach of trust that threatened the very foundation of Sutton Press. I presented the facts, one by one. I walked them through the financial trail, showing how over $500,000 had been siphoned from the marketing budget into a shell corporation owned by Marcus Thorne's family. I explained the pattern of professional sabotage culminating in the loss of our most prominent author. And then I placed the USB drive on the table. This drive, I said, contains an audio recording in which Ms. Hayes and Mr. Thorne discuss in their own words their plan to seize control of this company by fraudulently discrediting me. Elena shot to her feet. "This is an outrage. It's a pathetic, desperate act of revenge by a man who couldn't handle the fact that his wife was more competent than he was. That recording is a fabrication, a deep fake. This is a violation of my privacy." Marcus joined in, his voice booming with practiced authority. "This is a personal marital dispute that he is dragging into the boardroom. It is unprofessional and frankly unstable. As a primary investor, I must seriously reconsider my position in a company led by a man who would resort to such slanderous, illegal tactics." They were good. They were convincing. But their performance was built on a foundation of lies, and I had the truth. My lawyer, Ms. Albright, who was present via video conference, calmly interjected. "For the record, the recording was legally obtained from Mr. Hayes' personal cloud account, to which Ms. Hayes' device was voluntarily linked. Its authenticity has already been verified by a third-party digital forensics expert." The forensic accountant then presented his findings, his voice a dispassionate drone as he detailed the irrefutable chain of wire transfers, shell corporations, and conflicts of interest. The bluster began to drain from Marcus's face, replaced by a pale, sweaty sheen. The newer board members, the ones they had courted, now looked at them with dawning horror, realizing they had been pawns in a sordid conspiracy. Finally, Arthur Covington, the chairman, held up a hand, silencing the room. He took off his glasses and polished them slowly, a gesture I had seen him use 1,000 times when he was deeply disappointed. He put them back on and looked directly at Eleanor, then at Marcus. His voice when he spoke was not angry. It was filled with a profound, weary sadness, the voice of a man seeing a great institution betrayed. "This board," he said, his words echoing in the silent room, "was built on a foundation of trust and integrity. It is the legacy of a man who believed a person's word was their bond." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their faces. "We do not tolerate fraudulent behavior. We do not tolerate conspiracy. And we do not tolerate theft." He then called for a vote. A motion to suspend Ms. Elena Hayes and Mr. Marcus Thorne from all duties, responsibilities, and access to company property, effective immediately pending a full internal and external investigation. One by one, the hands went up. It was unanimous. The meeting was adjourned. As security quietly escorted a stunned Eleanor and a furious Marcus from the building, the news began to ripple through the office. There was no celebration, no gossip. There was only a collective quiet sigh of relief. The oppressive tension that had gripped the company for months finally lifted. Later that afternoon, our head editor, a woman who had worked with my father for 20 years, came to my office. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then simply said, "It's good to have you back, Liam." I stayed late that night, long after everyone had gone home. I stood before my father's portrait, the quiet of the building a comforting embrace. The first battle had been won. Order and honor had been restored to his house. In the days that followed the board meeting, a strange and quiet diligence settled over Sutton Press. The storm had passed, leaving behind a wreckage that needed to be cleared. My life became a series of long days and longer nights, filled with meetings with lawyers, accountants, and concerned authors. My task was not one of revenge, but of restoration. I was carefully rebuilding the trust that had been shattered both within the company and with our partners. I learned quickly that a conspiracy like an iceberg shows only a fraction of its mass above the surface. Elena's influence had run deep, and untangling the web of bad deals and toxic personnel decisions she had made was a slow and painstaking process. During this time, I had almost no contact with Elena. The divorce proceedings were being handled through our lawyers, a cold and impersonal exchange of documents. But I heard things. The world she had so carefully constructed for herself was not just cracking, it was disintegrating. The first pillar to fall was Marcus Thorne. In a move that surprised no one, he immediately turned on her to save himself. His legal team sent a formal letter to the board claiming he had been a victim of Elena's undue influence and professional manipulation. He painted himself as a well-intentioned investor who had been misled. It was a cowardly, transparent lie, but in the world of high-stakes business, it was enough to muddy the waters and distance himself from the primary blast zone. Their alliance, forged in ambition and deceit, dissolved the moment it was exposed to the light. The second pillar was her social standing. Eleanor had always thrived on being a power player, the brilliant and beautiful wife at the helm of a cultural institution. She hosted the best parties, knew the most influential people, and cultivated a circle of friends who orbited her success. Now stripped of her title and embroiled in a scandalous lawsuit, she was a pariah. I was told by mutual acquaintances that she had tried to rally support to spin a narrative of a scorned woman being victimized by a vindictive husband. But the story was too ugly, the evidence too damning. The calls weren't returned. The invitations stopped arriving. In a city that worships success, there is no greater sin than a spectacular and public failure. I pictured her alone in the starkly modern apartment we once shared, the silence amplifying the echoes of her spectacular fall from grace. But the final and most devastating pillar to crumble was her family. I received a call from her father about a week after the board meeting. His voice was heavy. He did not apologize for her, but he expressed a profound sorrow for the damage she had caused. He informed me that Eleanor had come to see him, and he felt I deserved to know what had transpired. He described the scene to me later. She had not come to him seeking forgiveness or solace. She had come seeking a soldier. She demanded that he use his money, his influence, his connections to fight me, to help her sue for control of the company, to destroy my reputation as I had supposedly destroyed hers. She was not contrite. She was incandescent with rage, still utterly convinced of her own righteousness. Her father had listened to her tirade in the quiet of his study, the room where he had taught her to read, where photos of her as a smiling child lined the shelves. When she finally ran out of venom, he did not raise his voice. He spoke to her in the quiet, disappointed tone that is so much more painful than anger. He told her that he had watched her for years, had seen her brilliance curbed by an insatiable hunger for more. He had seen her kindness curbed by ambition. He reminded her of his warning to me at the party, a warning he had hoped would somehow reach her. "I have always been proud of your drive, Elena," he told her, his voice weary. But ambition without a moral compass is just a fast car with no brakes. It was bound to end like this. She had stared at him aghast, unable to comprehend that he would not take her side. "But I'm your daughter," she had cried. He had looked at her then with all the sorrow of a father witnessing the worst version of his child. And he delivered the words that severed their final tie. "You have everything, Elena. Talent, intelligence. But you confused ambition with ruthlessness. And in doing so, you betrayed a good man and dishonored the very principles I tried to teach you." He had paused, his voice breaking slightly. "Your ambition has eclipsed your decency, and now you have nothing left. I will not help you. My loyalty is to the integrity of the company and to the family you tried to tear apart." He told me she left without another word. I imagined her walking out of her childhood home, the door closing softly behind her, leaving her utterly and completely alone in a world of her own making. There was no victory in that image, only a profound and quiet tragedy. There is a point in every great conflict where the heated personal battles give way to the cold, impersonal mechanics of consequence. My war with Elena had moved from the dining room and the boardroom into the quiet, paper-filled offices of lawyers and accountants. The language was no longer of love and betrayal, but of torts, breaches, and financial damages. It was a process devoid of emotion, a systematic dismantling of the life she had tried to steal, and it was in its own way the most brutal phase of all. Sutton Press, with the full and unyielding support of the board, filed a civil lawsuit against both Elena and Marcus Thorne. The charges were severe and meticulously documented corporate fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy, and significant financial damages resulting from their actions. Our legal team, led by the formidable Ms. Albright, had built a case so airtight, so overwhelmingly supported by evidence, that it was less a lawsuit and more a formal declaration of her ruin. Initially, Eleanor had vowed to fight. She hired an expensive and aggressive law firm intending to countersue for defamation and wrongful termination. For a few weeks, the air was thick with legal posturing, with threatening letters and motions filed. But her defiance was a bluff, and it was quickly called. During the discovery phase, our lawyers presented her team with the entirety of our evidence, the forensic accountant's report that traced every stolen dollar, the sworn affidavits from employees. She had bullied the transcript of the recording and the digital forensic analysis that confirmed its authenticity. Faced with this mountain of irrefutable proof, her lawyers' strategy shifted from offense to damage control. They knew, as did she, that a public trial would be a spectacle of humiliation from which she would never recover. A jury would hear her own voice plotting and laughing. Reporters would print every sordid detail. The risk of not just financial ruin but of criminal charges for fraud was very real. Her expensive legal team advised her to do the one thing her pride fought against with every fibre of its being: surrender. The settlement negotiations were brief and brutal. There was no room for compromise on our end. The terms were absolute. The final meeting took place in a sterile conference room on the 45th floor of a downtown skyscraper. I was there with Ms. Albright and my father. Elena was there with her lawyer, looking small and exhausted in a chair that seemed too big for her. The fire had gone out of her eyes, replaced by a dull, brittle resignation. The terms were read aloud. The divorce would be finalized immediately. Due to the proven infidelity and fraudulent conduct, she would forfeit any and all claims to our marital assets and any future alimony. Furthermore, to compensate Sutton Press for the damages incurred, she would be required to pay a settlement. The amount was $750,000, a figure calculated to represent the lost author contract and the cost of the internal investigation. It was a sum that would require her to liquidate every asset she had acquired, every stock, every piece of art, every last vestige of the life of power and influence she had so desperately craved. The final moment was the quietest. A thick document, the settlement agreement, was placed in front of her. Her lawyer gently pushed a pen towards her. I watched her hand, the same hand I had held at the altar, as it trembled slightly. She picked up the pen, a beautiful, expensive fountain pen I had given her for her 35th birthday. For a long, silent moment, she just stared at the signature line. Then, with a shuddering breath, she signed her name, the elegant loop of her signature, a final ironic flourish on the death certificate of her own ambition. Marcus Thorne, with his deeper pockets and greater fear of a public scandal, settled even more quickly. He paid the press a sum of over $2 million and resigned from the boards of a dozen other companies, his reputation as a brilliant investor permanently tarnished. He disappeared from the city's financial landscape, a ghost of his former influence. The divorce itself was a mere formality, the final stroke of a pen on a chapter that had already ended. I walked out of the courthouse alone, not feeling the joy of a victor, but the profound, weary relief of a survivor. I stood on the steps, the legal documents in my briefcase, and looked up at the sky. It was over. Every lie had been exposed. Every debt had been accounted for. The price of her ambition had been calculated and paid in full. The seasons turned, as they always do, washing away the sharp edges of memory and leaving behind the smooth, worn stone of experience. A year passed. The name Elena Hayes, once a headline in the city's business pages, faded into a cautionary whisper, and then into silence. At Sutton Press, the frantic energy of crisis management was replaced by the quiet, steady hum of creativity. We didn't just survive, we healed. We returned to the principles my father had established, not as a retreat to the past, but as a rediscovery of our true north. We published books that mattered, we took chances on new voices, and the soul of the company, which had been so close to being extinguished, began to glow once more. I changed too. The man who flinched at confrontation, who chose peace at any price, was gone. In his place was someone quieter perhaps, but more resolute. I learned that true strength isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it. The experience had forged me into a better leader, a wiser man. The victory was not in winning the war, but in learning how to protect the peace that followed. My office, once a sanctuary from the world, became a place of connection. One afternoon, I was sitting not at my large mahogany desk, but in the comfortable leather chairs by the window across from a young author. She was barely 25, a bundle of nerves and brilliant, untamed talent. Her first novel was a sprawling, ambitious work, and she was terrified it wasn't good enough. She looked down at her manuscript, her hands twisting in her lap. I don't know if I have what it takes, Mr. Hayes. What if it's a failure? I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. I remembered a time when my own fear of failure had almost cost me everything. Failure is just a part of the process, I told her, my voice gentle. Every writer who has ever sat in that chair has felt exactly what you're feeling right now. Don't be afraid of the blank page or the red ink. They're not your enemies, they're your guides. Your only job is to tell your story as honestly as you can. We'll be here to help with the rest. I saw the tension in her shoulders relax, her eyes light up with a renewed sense of hope. In that moment, sharing the wisdom my father had once shared with me, I felt a sense of purpose so profound, it filled every part of me that had been hollowed out. I did hear of Elena one last time. A former colleague mentioned he had seen her profile on a professional networking site. She was a mid-level marketing manager for a large, faceless packaged goods corporation in a city hundreds of miles away. Her world of glamorous art galleries and high-stakes deals had been traded for one of quarterly brand reports and social media engagement metrics. There was no pleasure in hearing it, no sense of vindication. It was simply the final sentence in a chapter that had long been closed, the logical conclusion to a story about a woman who had gambled her soul for a kingdom and had lost everything. That evening, I left the office as the sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the city. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I walked through the park near my apartment, a place I'd often walked with Elena in the early years, dreaming of the future. The memories no longer held any pain. They were simply pictures in a book I no longer needed to read. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of autumn and the distant laughter of children. For the first time in a very long time, my mind was quiet. The battles were over. The ghosts were at rest. I stopped by the fountain in the center of the park, the water catching the last rays of the dying light. I thought of my father, of the company he had built, and of the legacy he had entrusted to me. I had protected it. It had been scarred, but it was whole. It was stronger. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace that was deeper and more abiding than any I had ever known. People say a legacy is built of brick and mortar of assets and balance sheets. I've learned that a true legacy isn't in the walls of a building, but in the stories we choose to protect and the new chapters we have the courage to write. And for the first time, I felt truly ready to write my own. This story serves as a powerful illustration that the most dangerous betrayal often comes not from a moment of passion, but from a cold and calculated ambition. It teaches a profound lesson about the nature of justice. Liam's victory was not won through angry confrontations or emotional outbursts, but through silence, meticulous preparation, and an unwavering faith in the power of the truth. He reminds us that, in the face of sophisticated manipulation, the most effective response is not to fight fire with fire, but to simply pull back the curtain and let the truth do its own devastating work. Many of us can likely understand the unique pain of being let down by the very person we trusted to protect us. The lesson here is not to become cynical or to doubt everyone, but rather to never ignore your own intuition. When the small inconsistencies begin to add up, when the person you love starts to feel like a stranger, it is a sign that deserves your attention. Protecting yourself and the values you hold dear is not an act of aggression. It is an act of profound self-respect. And that leads me to a question for all of you. In your opinion, what is the unforgivable red line when work and family intersect? Can professional ambition ever justify harming the dignity and trust of one's life partner? Please share your own wisdom and stories in the comments below.